So welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me for part two of Destiny, Purpose, and Passion. Well, I would like to know, you can either respond by voice or type it in the chat window. How many people had a chance to watch part one of the program? If you can let me know, that would be really great. That way I know how much to talk about and how much to not talk about. If you just unmute your microphone, just briefly, and let me know. Oh, we've got some people. Somebody was asking for the link. I'll send the link to you later, Purnima. A lot of people watched. Charlie watched. Kellen watched. Okay, good. That's good to know. I may give a very brief recap of things, but I don't want to go too deeply into things because there's a lot more information to cover on this end tonight. And I'm going to try to fit it all into like 60 to 90 minutes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute microphones for people who have their microphone muted. If you have something to ask at any point, or if it's question time, then please feel free to unmute your microphone. So you can type this in the chat window, though, for the next question. And I want everybody to type in the chat window, okay? So you can't just sit around going, oh, I just want to be lazy and not do anything. Well, you can do that, but I'll keep pushing because I tend to do that until you leave something in the chat window for me. So how many of you, and I'll explain first, when I say the word heart, I'll give you the Michael Reed glossary of terms for the workshop. When I say heart, what I mean is your spiritual heart. Your spiritual heart. When I say heart, I mean your spiritual heart. It's interesting. I was covering this last night because most people are familiar with chakras. And interestingly enough, the heart chakra is called, Anahata chakra. And Anahata has several different translations, one of which is loosely defined as a sound being created by two things not striking each other, right? But it's like a sound of peace, of things coming together. It also means unwounded. So the word anahata refers to a concept of purity in a space of innocence. And when I speak of the spiritual heart, I'm talking about that space of your inspiration, that space of you just being naturally true to yourself and your ethics and your beliefs. So what I want you to type over in the chat window is to let me know if you're the type of person who makes decisions more from the head or if you make decisions more from the heart. Are you more of a head decision person or a heart decision person? Type that over in the chat window. Let me know what your feelings are about that. More from the head. Thanks for being honest. I think that's good. Probably head. Yep. Okay. Anybody else? You can also very indecisive. Yep. Head until I break down and go with the heart. Good. Good. How many people know how to listen to your heart? That's another thing too. Charlie says her heart. Yeah. Because a lot of times it's difficult for people to know their heart. Your heart would naturally be speaking if you're in one of those periods of times where you just do something and it's what comes naturally because there's no question in regards to what you should do. Those are the moments when you're acting from your heart. But because we get caught up in all sorts of complexes over the course of our day-to-day existence, it becomes very, very difficult to get into a space where we're acting from the heart. And quite interestingly enough, when people are interested into astrology, most of the time they're coming to the astrologer the first time because all they can hear is their head, or they're confused with their head, and they're not even in a position where they're able to tune into their heart. So they're looking for guidance. They're looking for guidance. And here's an interesting thing too. I keep having people popping in and popping out. So some people's connections might be dropping. That's okay though. Is the situation is that a lot of times when people come to an astrologer, when they're more in the head and they're approaching it from a head-based perspective, they're looking for the astrologer to tell them what to do. Okay, that is from the astrologer's point of view, that's an astrological no-no. You really shouldn't do that. And the reason being is you're stepping too much into the person's path. An astrologer's space is really to get into the position with the client where you're empowering them to make their own decisions, right? And interestingly enough, if you do astrology well, you can help the person to get into that space of the heart, right? Where there's not any confusion, because you're getting into the space where the person knows themselves. And probably one of the best ways to do that is by sorting through the confusion that's there. So you'll find, probably 90% of people make decisions more from the head than they do from the heart, right? Because we have to get to know our heart over time. Now, here's another question from people. Some of you have probably seen last night's workshop, so you're probably going to cheat, and that's okay. So the next question is, how many people think that you are your horoscope? Are you your horoscope? Type yes or no over in the chat window, and I'll wait for people to kind of respond. Good. We have one no, right? Let's see if anybody else comes out with something. No from Kellen. Let's see if anybody else says no or yes. No. Good. Right. Everybody is saying no. That's because you're all cheating. But maybe actually, maybe you're actually connected to that, or maybe you followed my posts for a long time, or maybe you just naturally know that, because you know what? You're not your horoscope. Interestingly enough, your horoscope just shows your karmic tendencies, what you're naturally predisposed to do at any particular moment in time. And guess what? That's the premise behind why prediction works in the first place, when it actually does come true. It's because the natural way that you responded was in alignment with the way that the astrologer said it was going to be. But interestingly enough, predictions don't always come true. And as an astrologer, when you work with predictive astrology, you get to learn that rather quickly, because you get all sorts of emails from people going, my prediction went wrong. What happened? As if astrologers with prediction are going to be 100% accurate 100% of the time. And as I was sharing last night with the class, one of the best known astrologers working with the Vedic system of astrology came out and said once that an accurate predictive technique is accurate 60% of the time. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, and this may shock you, that that's more accurate than a doctor is, believe it or not. Doctors are like around 30% accurate. That's a little bit scary sometimes, but I mean, it's a very complex situation. And with astrology, we can only really be 60% accurate, which is pretty good, but it means there's always a potential that a prediction will go wrong, because you're not your karmic tendencies, you're not your horoscope, you're not the indwelling consciousness who's going through the experiences in your horoscope. You're something that's much, much more than that. Okay, you're, really in terms of that, of what you are, right? There's a concept in Hinduism connected to Vishnu. And Vishnu is the aspect of God that permeates everything. Okay, so I always, when I'm trying to explain that concept to people, this would be Vishnu, and the computer that I'm talking to you over would be Vishnu. And right now, Vishnu is having a conversation with lots of different Vishnus over a Vishnu, because it's all just one thing. But our mind like isn't connected fully to our potential. And so we need to get into a space of more deeply being able to do that. And that's the whole thing with the karmic tendencies in the horoscope. It's that knot that's there for you to unravel so you can become more deeply and fully connected to your potential. And so you can tap into that part of you that doesn't doubt its own divinity, that doesn't doubt its purity, that's fully and deeply connected to that and living in that potential every single moment of time. Okay. And this is why it may have sounded last night for those of you who attended that I was down talking prediction a lot. And I'm not down talking prediction. I think sometimes prediction, when it's used appropriately, can be helpful. So what would that appropriate use of it be? I call it healthy planning. Okay. So in other words, rather than, an astrologer predicting to somebody that you're going to meet your spouse in a Chinese restaurant on this day and they'll come in with a mole on the right side of their face wearing a blue shirt. That's not really necessary, right? But perhaps, letting the person know, oh, this time's approaching and it's a really good opportunity for you to work on this aspect of yourself because it's probably going to present these lessons in your life. But the reason it's presenting those lessons is so you learn this, and so you connect more fully to yourself, and so you resolve this pattern in your life and focus on that. That's a really excellent use of astrology, because at the end of the day, what your horoscope shows you is your path to karmic resolution. And one of the most important factors in terms of determining that are what are called the karmic points in the horoscope, which, if you know a little bit about astrology, you probably know those as Rahu and Ketu. If you know Western astrology more than you know Vedic astrology, you'll know them as the North Node and the South Node. And so we're going to go a little bit into some concepts about that and how that works. But and what I'll do as well is I'll bring up a chart, because that's going to be a helpful tool. And I know some of you may have never seen a Vedic chart before, and that's okay. We're not going to ask you to read it. I promise. No, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put each and every one of you on the microphone, and you all have to read it. And we're going to talk a little bit about also the North and the South Node. But everybody has something that I like to call a karmic story. Okay. Now, why do I call it a karmic story? Well, a lot of people might call it, past life tendencies, or, as we were saying earlier, karmic tendencies. So why the karmic story? Okay, here's a good thing to ask. And some of you may not know what I mean by this, but let's see what people think. Let's see if I get a response. I'll wait a few seconds. Is time linear? Is there an actual past, present, and future? Right? Let's see if anybody says something. So we have a no there. Yeah. Maybe we are able to experience it as past, but when we're experiencing the past, we're remembering the past, and we're doing that in the present moment. Okay. There are some people who are able to immerse themselves fully in a past event, in their, by, what you call it, astral traveling, or whatever it is that you want to call it. Some people can immerse themselves in an environment in that way, but still they're doing that in the present moment. With the future, we're always like thinking about the future, but we're doing that in the present. So really the only moment we ever truly have is right now. Somebody just said time is a construct. At any given moment, we may embody all three. Yes, but it's all happening now. And so with the karmic story, I find if you go into talking about past lifetimes, people get fascinated by the past lifetime. Okay. And I always jokingly say that everybody wants to be the Egyptian princess and nobody wants to be the slave boy or anything like that. You know, everybody's fascinated by their, by their past life things, but they miss what it's about. Right. And I do a particular thing in some of my consultations called a karmic analysis, which works with the karmic story. And whenever I do that with people, I go into the concept of saying time is nonlinear. It's all happening right now, because what I want the person to understand is that what we're really talking about when we're looking at those things in the horoscope are patterns that will likely still be there with you. And it's interesting because people will always, pardon me, try to relate it to events in their present life, because what will happen is, as I'm talking about it, it'll hit home about some events in their present life, and then some things won't hit home, and they'll go, well, no, that didn't happen. And I have to explain to them, it's not about whether this actually happened, because we're not as concerned about predicting past events in your life. What we're more concerned about is the story that underlies that, that's creating a pattern in you. I'll give an example. There's one of the horoscopes, or one of the charts that I use in my karmic analysis, is called the D60 chart. The actual name for it is the Shastyamsha. And there are these things in it called Shastyamsha deities. And one of those is called Mrityukala. And Mrityukala means death time. And sometimes when that appears in the horoscope, the person may have a karmic memory of having been put to death for something that they expressed, or something that they believed in, or something that they came out with, or something that they embodied. And so generally what you'll find with that person in the present moment is they have a hard time stepping into their potential, because to them, stepping into their potential equates with trouble. And so if you can get in there and kind of work with that and help the person with that, you can release a lot of that potential that they might otherwise have stored up. So that's why I call it the karmic story, because you'll generally find that people are able to relate to the concept of their body of karma in the third person, rather than doing it in the first person. If they're able to step outside of themselves and look into their situation, they're generally going to be able to understand it more clearly. And so it's much more important that the person just understands the karma and not necessarily gets caught up in the details of the story. What's most important is the general gist of it. And individuals have karma in every single area of their lives. And so in the work that I do, and as part of the empowered approach to astrology, which is what we were talking about last night and tonight, one of the most important things is, first of all, understanding the karmic story that the individual has. Understanding the person's karmic story, what drives them, what causes them to behave in certain ways. And I want to explain a concept to you. I have to find a PDF file that I have, though, so bear with me for just one moment. If you have any questions, you can ask over in the chat window while I'm going in and finding this, because it may take me just a couple of seconds. Let's see. And oops, many bits of paper on the desktop. Let's see here. I think it must be this one. We'll know as soon as it pops up on the screen, and then I'll share it with everybody. Yeah, here we go. We have found it. And now I'm going to click the share button. So somebody said, if there is karma in every aspect of their lives, what do Rahu and Ketu specifically represent? We're going to go over that briefly right now, but I'm not going to go too far into depth with it, because that's a matter for a full course, if you know what I mean. And we're going to touch on a few separate things tonight. and try to squeeze as much into the next half hour as I possibly can. So let's go into here. Okay, so I'll explain this chart that we're looking at here in a moment. Okay. A good thing to understand looking at this is in astrology, one of the things that the sun relates to is the soul. Okay. The soul has two primary components, the individual soul and the higher soul, or the Jivatman and the Para-Atman, respectively. But the sun would relate to the concept of the soul. Now, the moon relates to something called manas, or our sensory mind, our consciousness, right? Our experience, what we're, picking up on, what we're subjected to. Let's click. I think people are dropping the connection here and there. So sun is the soul and moon is the manas, or the sensory mind. Now, here's an interesting thing. As the earth rotates around the sun, we have this perspective of the sun going north and south over the course of the year, north and south over the course of the year. Now, that path of the sun is called the ecliptic. And 12 different portions, 12 equal portions of that ecliptic is what we call the zodiac. But the path of the sun will appear to move north and south over the course of the year. And remember, the sun is your soul. Okay. Now, the path of the moon, as it rotates around the earth, is about 5 degrees off of that path of the sun. And so it crosses that path of the sun at 2 key points. As the moon is going north and it crosses the path of the sun, that's where the north node is created, or Rahu. Okay. And as the moon is going south in its journey, that's where the south node is, or Ketu. So interestingly enough, Rahu and Ketu, the north and the south node, are an intersection between the path of the sun and the path of the moon, or the path of your soul intersecting the path of your consciousness. And that's why Rahu and Ketu are, indicative of being the karmic points in the horoscope. It's where your consciousness meets your soul. It's also sorry, I'm just catching up on people's things that they're putting over here. And so what I was going to say is it's where the path of the soul crosses the path of your consciousness. And these are what are called the karmic points in the horoscope, the south node and the north node. These are also the points that create eclipses. And we just had an eclipse recently. An eclipse happens when there's a new moon or a full moon in close proximity to one of these nodes. And I could spend a long time talking about that, but we're not going to go into that subject for tonight. So here is how these two things work. I'm going to touch on them briefly. K2 is on many levels related to what I like to call our security paradigm. It's those things that we do in our life because we think, hey, if I do this, things will go well. Or maybe we know it doesn't go well, but we kind of get stuck and we don't know what else to do. And K2 has this suppressive, initially has this initial suppressive energy to it. So let's say, for instance, if a person has K2 in the house of relationships, which would be the 7th house, the person may feel like they need to have a relationship in order to feel stable or secure in their life, right? But it's a very suppressive energy, and it's an energy that creates a feeling of being stuck, as if there's no further development. And because we're stuck in that energy and there's no room for expansion or growth, Rahu comes into the equation, or the north node, and pulls us out of our comfort zone so that we go and explore things that we're not familiar with. We go and explore things that we're we're not familiar with. And then what happens over time is, because Rahu is indicative of very, crazy and wild energy, and we're exploring unknown territory and things that we're not familiar with, and having to learn to behave in ways that we've never really learned to behave, or explore things that we've never really had to explore. We get a little bit uncomfortable from time to time. And so then we just naturally feel pulled back to K2, which is like that little security blanket, which can then serve a positive purpose of giving us the potential to integrate the experiences we just went through with Rahu. And it's at that point that we go through that integration that K2 provides liberation from the previous way of behaving. So in short, where K2 and Rahu are in the horoscope, it's indicative of something the person's needing to work with over the course of their lives. And if you know a little bit about astrology, or even if you don't know a little bit about astrology, you may have heard of the ascendant or the rising sign. That's the first house of the horoscope. It's what sign was on the eastern horizon at the time the person was born, and it represents your point of view on the world. Now, directly across from that first house is the seventh house, which most people know that to be about relationships, but the seventh house is called the descendant, okay? And the seventh house is also indicative of the horizon. It's what you're moving towards. First house is your perspective. Seventh house is what you're moving towards. Now, the reason I'm talking about that is Ketu and Rahu are very similar to what the ascendant and the descendant are, only they're the ascendant and the descendant of your karma. So they represent the karmic story of every individual, which again, you're not your horoscope. Okay, because sometimes when we go deeply into understanding these patterns, we start thinking, I have to do that. This is the way that I behave, rather than going, I need to be aware of that so that I work with it over the course of time. Now, I'm going to move over into a chart to illustrate a few other points. If you have a question or two, you can please pop them in the chat window. We'll pause here to take a few questions if anybody has, or if you find it easier to do so, we can pause for about 5 minutes for questions related to the topics that we've spoken about so far. You can feel free to unmute your microphone if you want while I'm going in. Or you can just simply type it in the chat window. That's fine too. Okay. You're not going to see the chart yet because I haven't shared it yet. Okay, and let's see if anybody had a question. Nope, no questions so far. Okay, so let's go into sharing the screen. Beautiful. Okay, now for those who are not familiar with Vedic astrology, this is your main birth chart. But Vedic astrology has what are called divisional charts. And if you could imagine, we'll say this is your main birth chart, and we'll say these are divisional charts, which you can't see them because of my virtual background. It's making my head disappear. What they do is those divisional charts are a division of the main birth chart, and they merge in it. So what you're looking at with the divisional charts is the interdimensionality of human existence, things that are going on all the different levels in a person's life. Like there are charts that we look at for relationships, charts that we look at to understand a person's needs. And guess what? You're going to have a karmic path in every single one of those charts. So the potential of exploration of a horoscope is limitless. There's so much you can go into. You can understand a person's karma around success. You can understand a person's karma around relationships. And you can really get to the root of any problems that are there, especially if you work with a lot of different factors like I do, with things like the Shakti-amsha deities. Oh, here's that Mrityukala one I was telling you about. Here you'll see one called Kulanta, or family end. And you can incorporate nakshatras into the equation. Nakshatras are the lunar mansions, and we're going to talk a little bit about those too. Okay, so one of the most important factors in terms of an empowered approach to astrology is the karmic path of the individual, understanding the karmic story, understanding what drives the person, what causes them to behave in a certain way, going in and talking to them about that, giving them an understanding of it, helping them to release some of those patterns that they're stuck in, or perhaps understand how that serves them at some times and doesn't serve them at other times. Now, there are so many other factors that come into play in terms of the empowered approach to astrology. I want to talk to you about some of these other concepts. Again, I'm going to have to bring up another PDF file. That's okay, though. Let me go into my class files thing here, and we'll open that up. I believe it was... might it have been this one? Yes, okay. Astrology has, especially Vedic astrology, astrology from India, has these seminal fundamental texts that are very vital to it. One of those that's connected to Vedic astrology is called Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra, which is a dialogue between a sage and a seeker of knowledge who's talking to him. And people very often want to know, like, how does astrology work? That's what us astrologers get asked by people who are skeptics. How does astrology work? And a lot of times astrologers go, I don't know, it just does. And really, that's not a satisfactory answer. We should know. And there's a perfect description of how astrology works, but it's from a metaphysical perspective. And I'm going to share that concept with you in order to explain some of the other factors that I work with in the empowered approach to astrology. So let's pop into here. Great. Okay, so in Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra, there is a sutra there. And it's talking of a aspect of God that's called Janardana. And Janardana means the aspect of God that, and it sounds really horrible, I'm going to say beforehand, that agitates man, causing fear and worry. But really what it means is it's the aspect of God that stirs things up in us so that we work through our karma, so that we, confront things, so that we approach things with awareness. It doesn't mean we have to be afraid. And it doesn't mean we have to worry. It just means it agitates the mind so that we confront our karma. So the sutra goes, the supreme unborn spirit. So that aspect of God, which is just in potential, aspect of the universe, if you're not a religious person, substitute word of your choice in there, okay? It's absolutely fine. So it's the supreme unborn spirit, has had many descents. It has come down many times. Janardana, in the form of the planets, that's what the grahas are, rewards the fruits of the karma of the living beings. Okay, rewards the fruits of the karma of the living beings. And it goes on to say, destroying the strength of the daityas, which is more of the lower spectrum of how we interact. It's also refers to as demons, but demons don't have the same connotation as they do in the Judeo-Christian concept. They're just really unorthodox, perhaps a little more egocentric in their actions and reactions. So destroying the strength of the daityas, increasing the strength of the devas, aiming to establish dharma, or the path of righteousness for the individual. The auspicious births proceed regularly from the planets. So this is saying that all the planets are incarnations of God, okay? And it goes on to relate each planet to a particular incarnation of the deity known as Vishnu, who's the aspect of God that permeates all things. It says the avatar Rama from the sun, from the moon, Krishna, Narasimha from Mars, Buddha from Mercury, Vamana from Jupiter, Parashurama from Venus, Kurma from Saturn, Rahu equals Sukara or Varaha is also known, and from Ketu, the avatar Mina. And all others are also planetary born. So it means everything is planetary born. We're planetary born. That's what all others, we're all planetary born. Those with Pada Atma, or the supreme soul, is the larger portion, who are more tuned into that, are all known as heavenly. Those with Jiva, oops, we've got people in the waiting room here, let's let them in. Those with Jivatman as the larger portion. So let's rehash that. Those with Pada Atma, or the supreme soul, is the larger portion, are all known as heavenly. Those with Jivatma as the larger portion are known as the living beings. The Pada Atma portion, or the supreme soul portion, has gone forth from the planets, the sun, the moon, etc., and that arose into the births of Rama, Krishna, and all the avatars of Vishnu. Then they're absorbed at the end of creation, at the end of purifying the person's karma, they're reabsorbed back into the infinite potential of God. At the end of that, the Jiva portion goes forth and is born as humans, etc. But these two also then melt at the end of purifying their karma back into the imperceptible. So this lets you know that the individual and the divine are one and the same. But the divine incarnates as the planets to help us work through karma, okay? So let's move on to the next thing. So we know about the planets now, right? So the planets are incarnations of God. Actually, we're going to jump ahead a little bit. So in Vedic astrology, there's also something called the lunar mansions or the nakshatras, okay? Now, we're going to kind of have to move through some of these things rather quickly due to time limitations. So I do apologize because it's a lot of information, okay? But I just want you to have a little bit of an idea of why this works and how it works, okay? So just as the path of the ecliptic, the path of the sun, is divided into 12 equal portions that create the zodiac signs, there's another division of the heavens, right? Which is the path of the stars, okay? And those are not one and the same. They're two different divisions. They're joined together in Vedic astrology. For those of you who are familiar with nakshatras, they're joined together, but they're not the same divisions, okay? So the path of the stars moves in an east-west motion, whereas the path of the sun moves in a north-south motion. So if you take that path of the stars and you divide it into 27 equal portions, you have the lunar mansions or the nakshatras, okay? Now, there's something that I put down here. There's a deity in the old Vedic texts, starting in the Rig Veda, called Varuna. And when you go through and read it, it's very easy to get confused because you'll read through some of these ancient Vedic texts and you'll see that Varuna is connected to the skies. And then it'll say Varuna is connected to water. And then it'll say Varuna is connected to justice. And then it'll say that Varuna is connected to truth. And you go, well, is this deity changing? No, it's all one and the same thing. So Varuna was one of the Adityas. Okay, the Adityas are the sons of Aditi. Aditi is the boundless mother god, mother goddess, right? So Aditi is the boundless mother goddess. Sorry, I got distracted by something popping up on my screen. So Varuna is one of the Adityas who's born of Aditi. And so the Adityas are 12 different versions of the sun turned into deities. It says here Rig Veda lists 7, Bhagavata Puran lists 12. We're talking about the latter. Okay, so Varuna is one of these 12 versions of the sun, known as the Adityas, turned into a deity, right? The sun turned into a deity. Varuna is one of those. So if you remember, the sun relates to the soul. Okay, so Varuna also is related to the soul. So Varuna also in the ancient Vedic texts was noted for placing the stars in the firmament. He put the stars in the firmament and he split heaven and earth asunder. So he created duality by putting the stars in the sky and splitting heaven and earth asunder. Okay, that means the lunar mansions, the nakshatras, were created by Varuna. Okay, and it means those lunar mansions were created by Varuna for the purpose of rectifying our karma as well. And we'll get into that here in a moment. Varuna is also a deity connected to waters, as we were learning, right? So as he's connected to water and water creatures, he relates to the oceanic consciousness of the divine, vast and deep. And the ocean waves are a result of the moon's gravitational pull on the earth. Now, if you remember, Krishna is also connected to the moon. And in a text called Bhagavad Gita, Krishna comes out and says that amongst water creatures, he is Varuna. So Krishna is the incarnation of Vishnu connected to the moon. So it's no surprise to understand Varuna as the presiding deity of the moon. And in addition, the oceans. And if you remember, the moon is our manas, or our sensory mind, which has waves stirred up in it that we have to work through. We go through waves of emotions. We sense things in a clear manner sometimes and in a non-clear manner at other times. And that's due to the moon's capacity to reflect the light of the soul very well, which doesn't mean during a waning moon you're going to have distorted thoughts. Doesn't necessarily work like that. But it does mean that the moon's meant to be the consciousness that reflects the soul. So you'll see that Varuna is connected both to the soul and to the sensory mind. So Varuna passes through one of these different star clusters every night and creates waves in our minds, which really we're one and the same with all these things, so that we work through our karma. Now, here's an interesting thought. There's a text called the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, okay? And in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it mentions that yoga, or attaining union, is stopping the mind waves. Okay, so through astrology, we really have a very perfect yoga, a way of understanding ourselves, knowing ourselves. And that's what I think astrology is really meant for. It's about knowing ourselves, understanding ourselves, connecting to our karma, learning how to work through those things, getting into a space through doing that where we trust ourselves more, where we're more confident in who we are, where we're feeling more stable, where we're able to experience our consciousness on a much more sensory open level, because we trust ourselves and we're able to feel more inspired and more empowered. And doesn't mean challenges stop. They still exist, but we're able to stay aligned with who we are through it because we know ourselves. And that's why I think that is much, much, much more important than any prediction could ever be, right? So rather than going, when am I going to get married? When am I going to get a job? It's maybe better to understand why am I having a hard time getting a job? What am I meant to learn from this experience? What am I meant to learn from my relationship difficulties? How can I grow from this? How can I become closer to myself through all of these different things? Now, we'll come back to that. But coming back to the nakshatras for a moment, the nakshatras are somewhat like messengers between those aspects of God related to the planets and something else in the horoscope, which we're going to go into next. I shouldn't have left that screen because I need to go back into it. We haven't spoken about the signs yet, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Okay, So there's another sutra in Brihat Parashara Horus Shastra that says the imperceptible Vishnu. So remember, Vishnu pervades all things, but in this instance, he's imperceptible. We can't see him, we're not able to perceive of him or know of him. So the imperceptible Vishnu is the Kala Rupa, which means the figure of time. So Vishnu is time turned into a person whose limbs or body parts become unconscious as the signs that begin from the ram. So this is saying that the signs are unconscious body parts of the divine, right? And it's created by the concept of time, because we need time and space in order to work things out in our life and in order to purify our karma. Okay, so Vishnu is both that time and also the signs. So the signs, your horoscope, because without signs, you can't have houses, which are things like understanding relationships, understanding career, the different areas of our life. Those are a function of the signs, but you can't have those without the signs. Okay, so what the horoscope chart is it's an image of your incarnation and the karmic tendencies that you're here to work through. Now, notice this bit here that says, whose limbs become unconscious as the signs. This means two things. This means that without a planet transmitting some energy into that sign or somehow being connected to it, then that's just body parts, much like when a person dies and their spirit leaves their body. It's just the body parts. Now, before you start going, oh no, I don't have any planets in this sign, it doesn't mean that, because planets also rule signs as well. And that's, in that manner, they bring consciousness into the sign as well. But it also means this, it means that with the signs, it's the aspect of our being that isn't aware of its own divinity. It's not fully aware of it. It's unconscious. It becomes unconscious that it's Vishnu. Okay? And that's a very important factor to understand. Now, what's interesting is if you can understand, the planets are represented by deities. The nakshatras, or the lunar mansions, are also represented by deities. But the signs are represented by living beings. And as the lunar mansions or nakshatras are connected both to the manas, or our sensory mind, as well as being connected to the soul, they act as a messenger, right, for the planets to transmit a message into different areas of our life so that we work through things. And one of the fundamentals of the work that I like doing with people is helping them through the lunar mansions or the nakshatras and the symbolism connected to that to communicate with a planet that might be out of balance so that they can bring it more into balance, right? I'll give you a concept. I had a client once who was looking to move into a different house, because the house that they were in, or they were thinking of moving into a different house, but the house that they were in, it had pipes leaking. There was water, like, spraying like all over the place inside of the house. So they had taken a look at a couple of other different houses. And one of those was a restaurant that had been zoned both for commercial and residential use, but they didn't want to buy that because they didn't want to do anything with the commercial aspect of it. And the other one was a house that was right next to a river. Now, the house, astrologically, I should say, that's connected to home or buildings and things like that, is the fourth house. And this person's fourth house cusp was in Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra, which is symbolized by rivers. Now, the lunar mansions or the nakshatras, they have this eerie way of communicating to us in exact symbolism. I'll give another example. Like I was once staying on a farm when Jupiter had entered Uttara Ashada Nakshatra. And Jupiter relates to children. And Uttada Ashada Nakshatra has a connection to cows. Now, when I first started staying at that farm, the cows were giving birth to calves. So there, and Jupiter had just entered Uttada Ashada at that point. So there was a perfect representation of a child cow. Okay. So what I did with this person was I said, you might want to explore that place that's next to the river. Basically I checked in to see where they were at with that. Is that something you're leaning towards? And they said, well, I've been kind of leaning towards that place. And I said, well, you might want to explore it. And I also explained to them, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the place you need to move into, but something about you exploring that place will give you the guidance that you need in terms of what you need to do. So they did. They went on to explore it. And through doing that, they made the decision that they were going to continue living in the house that they were in, even though the pipes were bursting, and instead fix the pipes. And another aspect of Uttada Bhadrapada Nakshatra, which is where their home house was, is it has a sutra connected to it that relates to sprinkling upon from above. And the pipes were overhead and they were sprinkling water down. And so they made an option to go with that. And that was the decision that they felt comfortable with. So it helped them to resolve the conflict that was in their head by helping them to connect more with their heart and understand, hey, it's not necessarily about this or that. It's about making a decision from your heart. And I think that's what astrology wants us to do. I was sharing this in last night's video. There is a concept that when we are reaching the end of our lives, the last thoughts that we are connected with are what we carry over with us into the next lifetime. And there are some people who believe if you focus on, God at that particular time, or if you're a person who, works with chanting names of the divine or something like that, if you do that as you're getting close to death, then you'll connect more deeply to that. But what I always like to tell people is when we go through life always making decisions in our head, then sometimes, most of the time, we're doing things that they don't feel natural to us. They don't feel right. And if our lifetime is filled with that, when we reach the end of our life and we reflect back over everything that came before, what we're going to find is that we have a lot of regret. So at the end of our life, we're focused on regret, which creates more karma going over into the next lifetime. But instead, if you can reach the end of your life and you can say, this didn't work well, that didn't work well, but I always went with my heart. I always followed my inspiration. I always followed my ethics and my guidance. I stood by myself. You're going to have less karma to resolve in any future lifetimes, so to speak. So living from the heart burns karma. Living from the head, it tends to create more because you're not connecting naturally with who you are. So what I like focusing on doing with astrology in order to help my clients is to get them more into that space of making decisions from the heart, not necessarily saying this is going to happen to you, that's going to happen to you, because that's just dictating to the person when you do that. As I mentioned, there is a healthy use of prediction, I think, which is I call healthy planning, looking ahead and going, here comes a certain time. It may be a little challenging in terms of finances, but there's a reason. There's a reason that's going on. And let's look at the wealth you can get out of this as well, rather than just, focusing on the difficulty that's there. That's more of a healthy use of it. Astrology should always be empowering. It should never leave a client feeling lower than they came in before. And what I began to learn with astrology that was sheerly focused on prediction was that people would quite often hear things they didn't want to hear and would then feel depressed. And then they weren't in any mental or emotional state to hear the positive input. So the most important thing is to understand that karmic story and understand the ways and means with which to resolve that karmic story to a more positive ending. And what you're going to find is anything and everything that's happening in your life is a result of that karmic story that's centered around Rahu and Ketu, as well as the nakshatras. They're similar. Nakshatras are also nodes too. A lot of people don't know that. They're where the path of the stars intersects the path of the ecliptic. It's an intersection between those two things, right? And so they're they're very important, and they function in a very similar way to help us to unravel the karmic knot that's there. I'll see if anybody has any questions before I move on to another concept that we can wrap up with. If you do, you can feel free to unmute yourself if typing is too difficult, right? You can just turn off your microphone. I'm sorry, turn on your microphone. You're even welcome to kind of like turn it on and go, I haven't got a clue about anything you were just talking about. But I'm sure you do. No questions. Okay. So now you get a quiz. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't do that to you. I wanted to share with everybody a very special announcement that I have. Okay. So there's a very special announcement that I have that I'm getting ready now. I'm just opening it tonight. It's been, closed to launch my empowerment experience group program. Okay. This is something I used to do one-to-one with people, but I think it's much more effective in a group setting where you're working with groups of people, you're forming a community with each other, you're all working through loads of things simultaneously. The empowerment experience is a 6-week program that follows specific steps that are meant to help you to connect much more to your sense of purpose and your sense of passion through more deeply unraveling the karmic knot in your horoscope. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you into a page connected to it. And I have to open up my site first. And we'll share the screen. So I can let you know the things that we work with in that particular program. Okay. So these are the steps here. I'm actually going to read this to you because this is what the empowerment experience is all about. I want people to get more deeply into that space of full sensory living, tuning into themselves, remembering who you are, knowing who you are, because the more you can remind yourself of who you are and what you're here to work on, the more when there are difficulties that surface, you'll be able to go, nope, I know who I am. I'm going to let myself experience the emotions like frustration that there's something blocking my path somehow, or sadness about something that's going on. I'll let myself experience those emotions because that's also real too. I'll let myself process through them, but I know that I'm something far beyond those emotions. And I know that this is who I am and what I'm here for and what I'm here to work on and what I'm here to manifest to the world. And the more you can connect with that, the more those emotions will pass, and then you'll have expansion into another wave and another set of oppositions where you do the same thing. And it's a continuous process of becoming more and more whole, blossoming forth. And so as I put here on the page, living fully, it's what you want. You want to breathe life in deeply, taking in all of its glory, smelling its sweet fragrance, tasting its sweetness, touching its softness like silk, and hearing its beautiful music on each breath, and seeing its vivid colors. Inside of you, this is the life you were made for. You need it. Life can be passionate and meaningful, and you deserve to experience it in totality. Through the power of astrology, you can lead a life of purpose and passion. The Empowerment Experience group program brings an intensive approach with 6 group programs following the structure as outlined in various stages shown by the gold stars below. It also says intensive and private approach because part of what you get with it, I'll explain with you here in a moment, is a private one-to-one session. So the 6 different weeks, here's what we're going to be working on. The first week is vision. Okay, so I want in that first week to get people connected to what their ideal life looks like. What does it look like? Not what it feels like yet, but what it looks like. See it, see themselves experiencing it, experience themselves in that particular space, like giving me colors, things that are going on, all of those things. And then the next thing is, what does it feel like? Then we're making it more subjective, right? That gives us an idea of who you are, where you're at, and where you want to go. So that's you, your goals, the inspiration that drives you, right? That's a connection to your heart. That gives us an insight into that. And it helps us to begin to set a path to take you to that goal, which, sure, there can be challenges along the way. There can be frustrations. It's all a growing process, but it's about you following your heart. Okay, remember, it's not about going, if I follow my heart, will it turn out this way? Will it turn out that way? Sure, those things can be understood, but what's more important is that you're following your heart, that you're moving with your passion, you're moving with your inspiration. The rest of it is a growing process, becoming more and more whole. And if you focus on that, the concepts of prediction matter less. So once we understand the vision, the next step is the karmic tendencies. That's where we get into the karmic story, right? And we'll discuss this in a group together. But each person, as I mentioned, gets a one-to-one session as part of the program that will help us to understand your own independent karmic tendencies as well. Okay, and we'll touch on a lot of these things in the second part of it. Once we have the karmic tendencies understood and the vision understood, now we're in a prime position to plan your journey ahead more deeply and assess the things you need to work on going forward. And that happens through the roadmap. We get together in a group, we understand what each person's plan is through discussion, through, group talk, things along those lines. And remember, all during this time, you're forming a close-knit community with the people who are in the group. With the next step, I'm going to give you your power symbols. Okay, as I say here, Vedic astrology is rich in symbolism, especially with the lunar mansions or the nakshatras, which function as messengers between your psyche and the planets, which set the tone of your journey through consciousness. Here we're going to discover the best symbols, as in animals, places and environments, imagery, working with mantra, etc., for you to work with in order to aid your journey. Now, the 5th and the 6th stages, these are extra steps because a lot of stuff comes up through these first 4 sessions. So we're going to need extra time for implementation, talking about difficulties that we're experiencing during implementation. And by the time we get to the 6th step, which is reflecting back on where you've been prior to coming into the program, realizing the progress that you've made and cementing that going forward. Now, with this, and I actually just decided to add something new to this package today, right? But there are 6 different sessions that we do in a group together. But you also get a one-to-one session with me so we can get clear on the karmic tendencies in your horoscope. You also get ongoing access to me during the 6 weeks of the program through an application called Voxer, which you can put on your phone. It's also, you can use it on your computer too. It is available on a website as well. And what Voxer is, it's a voice, video, and text messaging app that operates in real time. So in other words, if you have a question, pardon me, that comes up for you, you can just record it by voice. At the moment that you're recording it by voice, if I happen to be near my phone, I'll see that message come up. I can listen to it as you're asking it. And in general, I'll get back to people within, generally 24 to 36 hours, because if you can understand, there's a lot of you. So this is for you to use while you're going through the program. Talk about things that are coming up, things that you need more help with, an extra layer of support that allows you to connect with me directly if you feel like you're getting stuck. You also get a 10% discount on everything in my universe, which is good for 6 months, right? From consultations, courses, memberships, etc. And we have private groups on Facebook and Discord for you to share your processes with other members and to participate in community with other people who are going through the empowerment experience. And in addition to that, what I'm going to also offer to people is I'm also going to give people access to a few different courses. There's a couple of courses I'm going to give you access to on Rahu and Ketu, so you can explore those more deeply on your own time as well. And a couple of courses I'm going to give you that are on the nakshatras, so you can explore their symbolism on your own, along with having your own chart, so you can understand where your planets are and kind of connect with those things yourself, explore them on your own, bring them up in the group session that we do together, in the time that we're sharing, all of those things. Now, this is going to launch in January. I mean, it's launching now, but we're going to start the first 6 weeks of it in January. After the first week of January, sometime around the 7th. And the reason I'm saying sometime around the 7th is when people sign up for the program, we're going to discuss between us when the best dates to meet are, so that, as much as possible, everybody can make it for every single date. If for some reason something comes up for you, though, and you miss a date, don't worry. You'll have a recording of what came up. You'll have the Voxer access, so you can kind of touch base with me if you need to during those particular times. So what I'm going to do, somebody said something here. So Kellen said, I'm trying to unpack in my head how nakshatras are specific modes that conscious planets use to help us wake up. Well, what they are, I'll touch more on, let's touch on that. Let's go into that. So nakshatras relate to our consciousness, right? Because they're connected to the moon, but they're also connected to the sun, which is our soul. So they connect messages from our soul to our consciousness. They're messengers, and they'll bring things up in our day-to-day existence. Like, for instance, if the moon's in Ashwini a certain day, and some of you may not know what that is, Ashwini is connected to horses, and suddenly you're walking along and you see a horse. That's like a cosmic message going, hey, pay attention. There's something you're meant to learn from here, or something you're meant to tune in to here, right? And it's through doing that something stirs in our consciousness, that something moves. And so we can use that in reverse. What we can do is we can go, oh, let's put some pictures of horses around your house, right? Or another thing connected to Ashwini is community. Let's get you connected with community and working in community, because that will improve that planet. And it does, it works. This is something, I've been working with, which is really exceptionally powerful. And I also have another way of taking different houses. Like, let's say you've got the 6th house, which can be tension, and you've got the 7th house, which is relationships. Let's say you've got the 6th and the 7th house that are being activated somehow, and you're having tension in your relationships. If you can find the midway point between those two houses by understanding the degree and knowing what lunar mansion that's in, that's a point of resolution for that conflict. And connecting with that can also help you too. So there's so many things that I use in my toolbox in working with this to help clients. So this program, the Empowerment Experience, is a great way of getting in there really deeply, having a supportive community around you while you're doing that, having Voxer access to me, as well as being able to learn about your own horoscope through courses that you have. And for people who are tuning into Destiny, Purpose, and Passion, meaning you, and people who are catching up with the recording afterwards, I'm offering this to people. And remember, this is a 6-week program, lots of extra perks, Voxer access, you're getting courses, you're getting the Facebook group, you're getting a one-to-one session with me. I'm offering this all for $999. So it's just $999, which actually six sessions with me alone costs $900. So this is quite a good bargain for the situation. In addition to that, for those of you who feel you may need it, there are payment plan options available. So you could take that $999 and break it down over 3 months at $333 per month. You could break it down over 6 months at, I think, $166.50 per month. And I would, if you really needed, I would even consider a 12-month payment plan. And with these, of course, what you'll be doing is the program itself lasts only 6 months. So, I'm letting you open up to make payments for it even after the program's over with. So also, if you remember, I said that there was going to be a special surprise. And there is going to be a special surprise. So everybody who is on the program, you should also, I'm going to type something in the chat window here. If you're not on the mailing list for the group, you need to get on it, and I'll give you another chance to get on it tonight. And let me just type this in, pardon me. Can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Okay, there's a link in the chat window. If you go to that link, you can join the mailing list, right? And if you go and you join that mailing list, I'm going to do a drawing tomorrow night. And for everybody who's on that mailing list, what I'm going to do is you go into that drawing and you can get into the empowerment experience absolutely free. So one person will get to be in the experience absolutely free. I will announce who that is tomorrow. This is your last chance to go join the waiting list. But if you want to be a part of the empowerment experience on your own, and you know that this is something that you really want, it's only $999. I'm going to do another thing in a couple of weeks that's promoting the event. And at that time, it's going to go up in price. So you're getting the lowest price offered on it. And I'll even give you a 3-month payment plan, 6-month payment plan. And if you ask me really nicely, I'd even give you a 12-month payment plan. So if you're interested in doing that, if you're interested in joining the empowerment experience, and it's something you already want to do, I'm going to type that into the chat window. I'll also put this in the group for those of you who are in the Facebook group. It's also going to get sent out to the list. Let's see, because I've been talking and typing at the same time. Yeah, here is a link where you can go read a little bit more about the event, which is the page that I was just sharing with you a moment ago. And from there, you can go on to join the empowerment experience if you really want to. And I do hope you do it. It's a lot of fun doing this. When I did this as a one-to-one program, I was having people were having so many incredible epiphanies with it. I decided to stop offering it as a one-to-one program because I feel like I can reach more people with it. And I think community will even make it more exceptionally powerful than it is already. So that's the special announcement. Okay, let's see if anybody has any questions. Patrick says, if I am on the normal mailing list, will I be put into the draw? You need to be on the mailing list for Destiny, Purpose, and Passion, which I think you joined that one. I think I remember you joined that one. Okay. And Charlie's saying, thank you. This has been amazing. What an incredible prize. Thank you. Thank you. So there will be a drawing tomorrow night, but if you want to go ahead and go all in, if you go all in and I draw your name, I'll refund it to you, of course, just so you know. But if you want to go ahead and go all in on the Empowerment Experience program, the link is over there in the window. I'll pause and see if anybody has any questions about anything that we discussed. You can all unmute yourself. I would unmute you on my end, but in case you've got noise going on in the background, I don't want to do that. So I'll wait a moment or two to see if anybody has a question. You can watch me drink water. As I jokingly said last night, maybe I'll do my ventriloquist act. Probably shouldn't do my ventriloquist act. I'll just choke instead. So nobody has any questions. Thank you so much for watching. It's been a pleasure sharing this with you. I probably could have added another night to this, I'm recognizing. I think next time I do it, I will add a night to it. But if you want to go enjoy the empowerment experience, I truly hope you do. It's going to be something that is simply phenomenal. The only reason I decided to wait until January in order to launch it is a lot of people get really busy over the holidays, and I think it would just be very hard for people to attend if we just started it soon. So I'm going to start it in January for everybody. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for saying thank you for everything. And I will talk to everybody next time, and I'll post those links to the group for everybody in the instance that you're interested, unless you've copied it down yourself. And I'll also send it out to the mailing list. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye now.